Okay, thank you very much for being here, Madam Francisca Addo. It's nice to host you again on this
Hey.
platform. So, to our viewers, this is Hope from Africa, and today we are hosting Madam Francisca Addo, a very smart and intelligent woman.
Yeah, woman,
Yeah,
yeah.
I don't want to go into the
It's like,
profile, but yeah, the little bit someone with a double masters,
hey.
yeah, across European countries,
Mm.
vast experience, also across European countries. For the context, she's from Ghana. She's lived in two European countries. Yeah, lived in another American country. So
And traveled across.
traveled across the continent, the world. So today we are gonna have a topic which some people would say we are a bit biased, and
Mm.
as we always say on this platform, we are biased.
Mm.
We've chosen sides, but we've chosen to be on the side of the truth. And that is why the title of this section is Neo-colonialism in 2026. And this sense we are referring to the Osajifo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana. So you're welcome, and it's nice to see you
Thank you.
again. So I chose this topic strategically because we were Ghanaian,
Mm.
and both of us are Ghanaians, and we know the role of the Osajifo in the country gaining independence, but also beyond that, and Pan-Africanism, and also his writings on neo-colonialism.
Mm.
Is it right for me to say that Kwame Nkrumah was right?
And if you say he was right, on what assertion? On what?
Nkrumah had, over the years,
Mm.
long ago, made a lot of what people would say prophecies, but I think it was based on knowledge from his end. And he had said certain things that could happen if we did not take certain actions back then, especially getting Africans to unite the United States of Africa, you know,
Mm.
and so that we could control our resources. He had warned us to do away with the artificial borders that has been imposed on us. He had warned us to ensure that we could have free transportation or free travel among Africans. And if you look at all the things he said and the implication it was going to have, at least back then, what he thought was going to have on us if we take the other route, I think, and that is my stand, that since we took the other route and not his route, we are actually experiencing the implication he said.
And what is the.
I mean, you can disagree with me, but it's
No, I
Africa.
want to understand your context of the other route.
So I'm coming in. Is Africa really independent? Are African countries really independent? And what I mean by African countries really independent, do we control our resources?
Mm.
And Nkrumah was very specific, and he wrote in his book about the way that our resources are being controlled. And for that reason, people, once they take charge of our resources, they take charge of controlling us. And
Mm.
I'm going to give you a very, maybe not an in-depth one, but a very current scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire together produces
Cool.
50% of the world's cocoa.
Yeah.
Even as our production have come down, we still produces 50% of the world's cocoa. Ghana produces the highest quality of cocoa in the world.
Mm.
But because of colonial structure that we fall back on, we don't have any control on pricing
Mm.
both of these countries. In fact, if Africans had not fallen on these colonial structures and Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire alone came together to have some kind of structures, we could be kind of the lead in managing the cocoa market. Like if we decide, it would be. But today, because of those structures and the government decided to not go in for syndicated loans again, people are running away. Our investors are running away. They are not giving the government money. And if they are not giving you money, you cannot buy. And
Mm.
an additional layer is that because we fall on this kind of structures, we don't even process up to 50% of the cocoa we have in our country.
Mm.
So now when these people are falling back, the prices are going down, we are kind of forced to go back to their structure again, to go and beg them for loans so that we will be able to buy. You get what I'm trying to say? So in
Yeah.
other sense, are we really independent when we are at the mercy of these people?
This is an interesting question, and I'll answer it in two different ways. So, politically, in terms of on the surface, yes, we do have presidents, ministers. So, in terms of political independence, I would say yes. But in terms of economic independence, I would say no. So, using the cocoa as an example, or let me use a more one that I am sort of have sort of knowledge in it. So, let's use the context of World Bank and IMF, and then the structural adjustment programs. So, these are economic aspects. So, we go for loans from IMF and World Bank, and then there are certain conditions attached to it, like for instance, I'm not really sure about the year and other things, but there were instances where we went for loan and then there was hiring freeze in terms of employment and other conditions. So these were like certain conditions that have been attached to the loan and then we have to abide by them. So if you're looking at in terms of the surface where, oh, we have a president, we have ministers, we have all these people in governance, then politically, yes, we are independent. But economically, since we are sort of over relying on these Bretton Woods institutions, then in terms of issues of economics, that we are not independent. So it's in a way we govern ourselves, but on the other way, there are some sort of, I would say, unseen forces pulling the strings as to how we manage our country because we have not sort of developed ourselves to the extent that we want to rely on ourselves and our resources. So I think it's the two sides of the same coin. It's a yes and then it's a no answer.
If you are politically dependent and economically independent, are you independent? It
That's why
makes
we have
sense because
neo-colonialism. So, like, directly, you're the one governing your nation, but indirectly, there are unseen forces pulling the strings for you.
so then we are not independent.
We are.
I mean, if you are independent and how your people will feed themselves is dependent on another country, it's kind of questionable.
So, I get where you're coming from, but for a country to be recognized as independent and sovereign, then we have international organizations and other world institutions that need to recognize this country. And if you are using that argument, then we would say that we are a sovereign and independent nation because worldwide or internationally we are recognized as so. So on that level we are independent, but there are certain aspects of our economy that are not totally independent because we have unseen forces. So I think this is a very tricky question. I would say we are independent, but yes, but there are some aspects where we still have a say, but not a total say or a total control.
The concept of independence, I think I disagree with you on this because
Mm,
if a person is independent, then you should have control of your resources.
okay.
You should be able to make decisions for yourself.
Mm,
You don't need to look out for what someone else is thinking
mm.
before. Africans' independence, when the US can just strike an African country when it thinks that they are not being democratic, in the sense that, meanwhile, the concept of democracy, and I'm just bringing in democracy just to explain something.
I think the issue here is we are independent, but there is this level of dependency on. I am taking it from that perspective in the sense that politically wise, we are independent, but there's some level of dependency on these institutions because if you had to go back to the pre-independence era, what was the ideology of independence? To govern ourselves. So if we are using that context, then we are independent as a nation.
I think that the ideology of independence
Mm.
actually is not from the pre-independence era. I mean because Africans were independent before they became dependent. They were forced to be dependent on someone. I
So
would
yeah,
say that independency is the formal independence.
okay. But when I say pre-independence era, I'm talking about the colonial era. So my focus is not on the pre-colonial era. I'm talking about the colonial era.
Yeah, but now we are in new. So the whole agenda or the whole statement of neo-colonialism
Mm-hmm.
then tells you that we are still colonized. but in a new way. That is the whole thing. Neo-colonialism.
And indirect.
An indirect way of being colonized.
Okay.
And you made a point, like you said this. And this is not very far away. This is just recently in our last IMF. The country is still under IMF, right? We haven't gotten out of it. Right. Yeah. And there were freeze on employment. Just recently, I know 2 PhDs that were trained at the University of Ghana, and the department needed them, really, really needed them really well, because the department had lost like 3 lecturers through retirement, and they still had 2 lecturers that were doing post-retirement contract, and those people wanted to go. But the department or the university has not been cleared because an IMF conditionality says they cannot be employed.
Okay.
So if even institutions that is providing knowledge do not have the right to employ people to provide the knowledge, unless an IMF, some institution, has given the government a go-ahead to give employment, how are we independent?
That's why I said...
What is the political decision here?
That's why I said politically, or in terms of governance, or in terms of governments ruling the people, yes. If you say we are not independent, I do not agree with you. I am arguing that we are independent, but there is some level of dependency when it comes to some aspects of our economy. Because if you say we are independent, meaning that the overall economy or the overall structure is being governed and being determined by forces outside. But in this context, we are the ones governing ourselves, just that a section of it, or some, let me say, little aspect, for the lack of words, some little aspect of the economy is being, we are part of the management, but there are still some strongholds somewhere trying to also manage it in a way that suits them. So if we say independent, that means you have like some sort of overall authority to do so, which we do at the moment, but not to certain aspects of it. I think this issue of independence and dependence, it's kind of...
Yes. I get your point, but again, even in the times of colonialization or colonialism, where the people used to be there, like we were children of the British.
Children.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the Queen was our mother. The Queen was our mother. Even around that time, we still had control over certain aspects of our economy.
Which one?
Think of it. Even let's even go back to slavery. In those plantations, in those farms, and in those, it was the decision for the African, when they get up in the morning, to go and work in that plantation, that brought in the money that was siphoned outside, right?
But the fact that they have to go and work in a plantation doesn't make them independent, because they still had masters.
One could argue that yes, they had masters, but having a master physically present and making you dependent is not different from having a master that is not physically present yet making decisions for you. That is even more dangerous, because it makes you feel like you are in charge. Let me give you an example. It's like when I was a child, my mom, and she raised us as a single mother, so she would usually come and be like, "Eben, what will you eat for tonight?" And then she would be like, "Yeah, but we have rice, we have," and then she will tell you all the things there, and you realize that there are only 2 choices that you can make. It's either you eat the rice or the yam and pesi, like the boiled yam, So in other words, my mom was making me feel like the king that is making the choices for the food we were going to eat, but she has actually presented only 2.
I get your perspective, no doubt about that.
All right, okay, so let's in the light of this, why do you think African leaders, and you can also disagree with me if you think that they don't do that, why do African leaders often implement policies that clearly hurt their own people? And in this sense, I'm talking about their country, but also the African continent as a whole.
By implement policies that hurt their citizens. Like, I want you to be clear on that.
There are visa restrictions among ourselves. And clearly these visa restrictions is restricting trade among ourselves, which can improve our own countries. right? You have lived in Europe. You know how if you want to go and get something in another place, you can easily go and get it. You
Yeah.
can easily get up and go and do your business somewhere. I know people in the Netherlands that drives to other European countries to go and work easily. Right, so that is hurting. It's not only hurting the people, but it's also hurting the economy. For instance, I'm here and I feel safe to say, okay, and this I'm even bringing it to social life. If I meet somebody in Germany and the person is living in Bonn, I can go into a relationship. I know somebody who is here in a relationship in well, even in, you say
Because there is free movement.
there is free movement. You don't need to go and apply for visa for a number of you get what I'm trying to say. But on the other hand, is when it comes to the people themselves, we clearly saw a policy of haircuts that and that is what we're saying that happened in Ghana. And this we know that it was an IMF conditionality, right? That's
Yeah.
because of certain mismanagement. Now they had to cut, like people who have bought bonds, their bonds had to be converted and taken care. And we saw a man who came to say that all his money was gone. He made like he presented this and he didn't have money to go to the hospital, and that man died like a few months, not even months, like within that same month after making that presentation. But this is just one example of the person that suffered. There were thousands and a lot of people that suffered even in our context. But this is happening all over the African continent. So my question is, why do we often implement such policies? Why is it so difficult for us to, for instance, and I'm just using an example you can use, say, okay, this is Africa. A brother from Ghana should just be able to walk to Nigeria and it should be okay.
So I would take this from two different perspectives. You're allowed to agree, you're allowed to disagree. So I would say that it is not always the case where policies are implemented to quote and unquote, using your words, hurt the citizenry. So for instance, let's take the issue of free movement or borderless Africa. I think the issue with us Africans is that there is tons of ethnic groups or tribal units, and most people do see themselves that way more as compared to their state identity. So if you come to Ghana and then you ask somebody, hey, who are you? The person will say, I am a Fafa, I am an Ashanti, I am a Fanti. The person would never say, I am a Ghanaian. And using the issue of free movement, I think we've not really come to understand the whole concept of it. We are now trying to grasp it. And I wouldn't sort of blame any government who would want to have some sort of visa restriction, because they need to do a lot of pilot tests to, how should I put it? They need to do a lot of pilot tests to get this right. And if you are comparing Europe to Africa, infrastructures have been placed for this whole idea of free movement. There is the train, the quality of roads, and then you even say there's free movement. I remember when I was traveling from, how do you call it, from Italy to Germany by train. When I got to the Italian-Austrian border, the train had to stop. Soldiers came in and then they would ask, oh, where is your resident permit? Just to make sure that people had the requisite document to enter into the next border that they are going to. But in this context, one, in terms of identity, most countries do not. Some states do have, but how effective and how efficient is it? Because even in Ghana, we have the Ghana card, right? But how many people do have it? So let's assume if I am traveling, how many people do have passport? So it's, I would always say that it is not always the case that these government do things to hurt the citizenry or the continent as a whole, but I would argue that we have not really made up effective and efficient infrastructures, especially in the case of this issue of free movement or borderless Africa. So I think that if we have all the structures in place, we have all the policies implemented, and then we have the people in charge doing an effective work, then certainly certain policies would go into place. But if, let's assume, I am Ghana and somebody is coming from Nigeria, I think we've not really developed our immigration system to, if I'm right, if I'm wrong, just correct me. But I feel like we have not really had that system to check out and say, oh, this person entered this country and when is he leaving, especially by bus or by something. But if by aeroplane, we know. In that, based on the argument you raised about borderless Africa, I would say that enough structures have not been put in place for that. So in a way, I agree to the certain restrictions being imposed. Uh, uh, corruption. So let's look at this one. The Korean president is Hassan Ouattara, right? That's his name. You know, before he became president, I saw how he was saying that the incumbent, who was then the president, was a dictator. He didn't want to leave office. He was sort of oppressing the people. And then, fortunately or unfortunately, that man was taken out and then he was voted in as president, thinking that he would do differently. But how long has he been in office? Let's take in the case of Congo or DR Congo, where they mine gold and other minerals. Because certain people in the helms of affairs are benefiting from it, then they'll implement policies that would actually favor them and not the people. So if you're arguing from these two perspectives, then would say that sometimes there could be issues of greed, corruption, and selfishness that is making our leaders implement certain policies because it favors them. And then secondly, these policies are implemented not to also hurt the people. In terms of using the Borderless Africa or the free movement as an example, is that enough infrastructures have not been put in place. So certain restrictions are there to sort of protect the nation against intruders and quote and unquote bad people like terrorists and other things like that. So it's a two-way affair, depending on whichever context that an individual is arguing from.
I had a follow up question. I tend to think that it is more expensive and requires more structure or capital intensive to have bordered Africa instead of borderless Africa. I think that the system we are running now is more costly than having a borderless Africa. Why am I saying this?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even if we decide to move from this bordered Africa and hopefully we do so to a borderless Africa, what do we need? It's just the person having the passport, right? We are not saying that you can just get up and like you were saying in Europe where you were traveling and then they had to check and see
Yeah.
your if you had a residence permit, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it was not the residence permit of Italy, it was the residence permit of the country you were coming from, right?
So as of that time, I was living in Italy. So you know, in Europe, if you have a resident permit in France or something, as long as you are traveling to other nations, they just see the country where you are living in's resident permit, and then you are good to go. Yeah.
Exactly. So some likely for us, some African countries have this arrangement to go borderless, right? So I go to Kenya all the time, and I can stay there for 3 months as a Ghanaian, right? It does not mean that I don't need a passport to go there. I need to hold a Ghanaian passport.
Yeah.
But I don't know have to go and queue waiting for a visa. I can get up today if the need arise that I need to go and do business. I need to go and take certain data. Maybe I got a Kenyan girlfriend and she's not feeling well and I need to go and see her. I can get up today, hop on the next flight to Nairobi and just get to the airport. They just check you are Ghanaian. And then they stamp it for you. Good to go.
I am not at debunking what you are saying, but what
Now,
I'm.
now, now, so I'm coming back to the structure point.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I found that even less dependent because now the whole point of going through the visa and all that employment and that systems that have to go into that visa processing and all
Mm-hmm.
those things is taken away completely, right? We don't even need like that structure to exist, right? So I'm saying that if we can travel now,
Mm-hmm.
even with the visas being imposed on us through transports, like people still go to Nigeria from Ghana with buses.
Yeah.
People still do that, right? But then these people probably would need, if it's another country, they would need visa before they can travel to through the. Why can't it just be that okay? If I have my Ghana passport, I can just pick up my car and just go to Nigeria because I have Nigerian friends. Because I feel like today I'm an African, I feel like being a Nigerian for just one day. Let me just go eat food in Nigeria and come back to Ghana.
Yes, I understand what you're saying, but what I'm trying to get to is that I think as a continent we have not fully grasped the whole idea of borderless or free movement. And as I was saying, for instance, the EU. EU is a very effective and an efficient body, and then they've written down enough plans or policies to sort of support this whole idea of free movement. But in our case, we have the ECOWAS and then we have the AU in general. But what kind of policies have they written down, or what kind of policies have they drawn so far to ensure that this takes place? Because I'm assuming that a country can decide that. I think Kenya was like, oh, Ghana, we have this visa free thing with you, but that is not the case for Egypt, because even though Egypt is part of Africa, those are the not. Even though they are part of Africa, when you tend to ask them, they don't really want to associate themselves with us. And so I think there is this issue of different identities. You get it? So if there is this issue of different identities, we have not really grasped the whole concept of we being Africans, because somebody might say I'm African, but when you ask him, she or her or him or whatever, the person would want to mention the tribe. So what I'm trying to say is that the AU has not been effective enough to put down structures or to put down things as to how this is to go about, because if the countries are doing it individually, then it will take a long time for everybody to come to terms with it. But if the AU was effective just like the EU, as to how they've planned over the years, as to how this free movement is supposed to take place, this is how this is supposed to be done, this is the requirement, then it would have been better off, it would have come off. But if it is being left or is being subjected to a country's discretion, then it could take 10 years, somebody would agree. It could take just 1 year, others would agree. So it all comes down to the organizations we have in the continent. Are they effective? Because let's assume that if there was no EU, would there have been free movement in Europe? Like, this is a rhetoric question. So if there was no,
it's and
yes, that's what I'm trying to say. If there was no EU, would there have been some sort of free movement? The whole idea of Schengen in Europe, not at all.
there is this Pan Africanist. I think it's a young boy, and he said that he have one question that he would ask the EU leaders when he
Yeah,
meets them,
boys video.
and he said, what the hell have they been doing since they went there?" And I get it,
And
but
I was saying, so I was saying that the EU has sort of projected this European identity. Even though there are like individual nations in there, somebody would say Dutch, somebody would say I'm German, somebody would say I am Danish, but there's also the overall EU identity. So this has also helped improve this issue of free movement. But in our case, some people don't see themselves as Africans, especially those at the north. Others see themselves more tuned to their tribes than to the overall state. And then the AU as an overall body is also not helping, because everybody is sticking to his or her country as compared to the whole continent. So coming back to Dr. Nkrumah's idea of a united Africa, if that had succeeded and then there was a united Africa, then I would say the borderless or the free movement would have been realistic, because there is an effective organization. But in this case, we have the EU, which is more like, I don't want to sound me, like a rubber stamp organization, which is just there to show that, oh, there is an association of African countries who have come together. But overall, I would say they've not been effective and efficient enough in their operation.
actually, that was what I was going to ask. Is the EU really an EU or a subsidiary of European unions that is being casted as an African Union? And that's anyways brings us to our next question.
Mm,
I'm going to combine two questions in one so that we yes. Nkrumah warned us about the
mm,
African elite that manages the states on behalf of foreign powers,
mm-hmm,
right? He told us that the threat to democracy
mm-hmm,
would not come directly from the European Union or from Europe or from America, but from the elites that would manage the state on behalf of these people.
mm,
In recent years, we have seen surge in African leaders trying to kind of Western interest, have Nkrumah's prophecy, and I quote unquote prophecy, been fulfilled? And why do you think that these African leaders are passionately still defending the interest of Europe and their slave masters?
This is a very interesting question. And I recently read a book called The Structure of Imperialism by one of my classes by a man called Garton. I've forgotten his first name. And I'll use that to explain that. But before then, I want us to sort of categorize the nations into three using Wallenstein's idea of the world system, where we have the core, the semi periphery, and then the periphery. So let's take the semi periphery out. So the core will be the Western societies, and then the periphery will be like the global south. So in this context, some African nations, yes. And using the book that I read called The Structure of Imperialism, so this man made mention of the alliances of elites or the interaction of elites between the core and then the periphery, in the sense that even though the core is sort of exploiting the periphery, there are certain groups of people within the periphery or the, let me say, less developed countries that are benefiting from this exploitation, that is the elites. So based on this alliance, even though the developed ones or the core ones are exploiting us, because there is a sort of alliance and interaction between the elites of these two groups, they also tend to benefit in a way from whatever exploitation that is taking place. So in this context, when we bring it to the African context, the alliance between the elites of the periphery, which is some African nations, and then the elites of the core, which is the developed nations or the global north, explains your question that some of our African leaders are enjoying from this exploitation, even though the overall exploitation is a harm to us, but because of some sort of interest that they have in it, some sort of gains that they are getting from it, there's that constant alliance and interaction between them and then the Western countries. So the constant, should I say, the constant, you use the word, the constant support for whatever that comes from their end. So that's how I'm going to explain this, that there's some sort of alliance between these two groups of people that I've mentioned. And then they are also gaining or getting benefits from this exploitation as well.
So leaders or the elites, I wouldn't say leaders, let me say the elitists, because in the voice of our current vice president, he said intellectualism. No, elitism being paraded as intellectualism.
Mm.
The elites in our society are the people that are defending the interest of these people. And it's this has always been the case since colonial days. In fact, the white man was wise enough to kind of invest in our elite group, and there are people who feels they are elites. Some of them are in power. They feel even more British than being Ghanaians. I recently had a cause to do a video where I was very angry about the minority in Ghana's parliament reaction to the United States ban on visa processing. Hey, nobody is saying that it is good that visa processing have been banned, because of course people have
I think
relations,
the ban was for immigrant visas, not for non-immigrant visas.
and in fact even it was for about 74 countries.
Mm.
In 74 countries in total. The minority could say that it is because the foreign affairs minister deported an Israeli. That is
Okay.
why the US is doing that. And I'm like, how do you justify this? Are you also saying that the other 74 countries, it is because their foreign affairs minister have deported somebody?
Mm.
But in fact, if you even look at it from that angle, let's granted without accepting, granted that this indeed was the reason why it was being done that way. What caused the foreign affairs minister to deport the Israelis?
Based on the backstory that I heard, some Ghanaian people were going for, I think, a conference
Exactly.
in
Members of
Israel.
parliament.
Yeah, and then I think at the point of entry, they were denied entry and deported back to Ghana. So more like a retaliation. But I'm not sure that would be the reason why US would say we are actually banning or putting a hold.
As exactly my point. But so it's not about even the reasons. For me, what is interesting here is the fact that a whole minority group in parliament couldn't say we will stand by our colleagues, which as minorities are part of it, that we were badly treated, because they were not just deported, they were arrested, put in detention, and over years or hours of negotiation before they were released.
But I think you should also note that the kind of politics we have back home is sort of quote, pardon my words, a bit dirty because there's always this issue of propaganda. It is not my government, it is a different government. So anything to make the government look bad is accepted by the other party or the other
So that is my worry now. Like, in order to do this, you want to bid your masters, I don't know, for the lack of a better word, kiss the ass of your masters, instead of defending the identity and dignity of your country. I mean, in fact, the whole reason they bring up is ridiculous. And like you rightfully said, there is no way the US would say that it is because of that thing they are stopping processing. And in fact, it could not be because of that, because there were over 70 countries that were affected by it.
Mm.
You get it? But
Yeah.
to prove that, and to even not be able to think through that, even if it's propaganda that you are doing, this really serves the interest of another country than actually protecting the identity of Ghana.
But don't forget that the other country, which is the US, so in IR we have something called realism, where a country looks out for his own. I don't want to use a gender term, but a country looks out for itself or herself if you are going to the feminine aspect. So in this case, I wouldn't say US is wrong to say that they are banning immigrant visas, because in this context they are looking out for their state or their country's interest.
Yeah,
Yes.
definitely.
And then also, as we Ghanaians, we are also looking out for our interests. But in this case, their interest overrides us because they are the ones granting the visas. So in their context, they are not wrong. And then also for us arguing that we do not need to be meted out with this treatment is also not wrong. So
No,
it's like,
no, it is completely not wrong.
mm-hmm,
And I would have preferred these people come out and say this treatment is unfair.
okay.
I would have preferred that. But to come out and say that it is because a certain group of people were treated
Or like
bad.
the party allegiance overrides the national allegiance.
Exactly. It's been, I don't know. We have a long way to go as Africans. We have a long way to go.
And then back to the issue of identity. So as I was saying, I think sometimes we don't really take this importantly, but it's very important. The issue of identity. People are more sort of show more allegiance to their tribe or ethnicity than the overall nation as a whole. So this also affects what kind of interest or what kind of yes, this affects what kind of interest is being put out there. So if it is not really my tribe or something or someone in my tribe that is doing it, not necessarily about Ghana, but the whole of
Africa.
Africa. So sometimes, let's take the issue of elections. When somebody is voting, some people don't even look at the context of the manifesto or what kind of policies the person is bringing, but that the religious identity. Oh, this person, I go to the same church with him or her. Or this person is a Christian. This person is a traditionalist. So I have that sort of connection with him or her, so I would agree. And then there's also the tribal allegiance. Oh, this person is an Ashanti, is a Fanti, or in Nigeria. In the case of Nigeria, we really see the issues of identity affecting election. Somebody will say, I'm from the north, so why should I vote for somebody who is from the south? So I think the issue of identity should also be looked at, especially in Africa, because it overrides the whole national interest. Somebody will want to look out for their ethnic or religious interests based on their identity than the overall national interest, because they seem to be like the person spearheading it is not somebody that I am affiliated to in a certain way. So yeah. So party identity, religious identity, tribal identity. This is like very deteriorating things that is really happening in Africa that we should also look out for. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you very much. For the very insightful and intellectual conversation we've had here. Like I said, over here we stand by the truth, and so we are grateful having you here. And we're actually looking forward to hosting you again.
Okay.
Extend my greetings to, or this one, it will not come in the podcast. Extend my greetings to.
I heard you.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. So let me.
Dear listeners, this is Hope from Africa, and we have heard from Madam Francisca Addo, the lady with a double master's,
Hey.
PhD candidate in progress, vast experience and exposure, and still beautiful. Okay, Francisca, let me chat to you on WhatsApp.
Okay. Bye bye.